Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the replay. I hope today is particularly helpful for you. And to do this, you're going to need to grab a piece of paper and a pencil because we're going to do a communications audit. And I know Dee Dee is always prepared with paper and pencil. So let's get started today. Today, we are going to do a communications audit because I want you to assess yourself on how capable you are in demonstrating your capability versus hiding your capability. So many people, especially people who are very smart or very proficient in what they do, hide their capability because of their communication skills. They're very capable, but other people don't realize how capable they are because they bury their talent behind poor communication skills. So, we are going to start today to talk about 7 audit points for you to assess. So, I'm going to go through all 7 first, and then we're going to go back through them and you will grade yourself. So, let's get started. The first one that happens a lot, and this is probably the most important one, is burying your point. This really makes you look less capable than you are because somebody asks you a question. Where are we with the project? And instead of answering, we're on schedule or we're behind schedule, your answer is, well, we decided to meet last Wednesday. And last Wednesday, we went through all of the points, but then we realized we had to talk to accounting. And we tried to talk to them on Thursday, but they weren't available. Well, that wasn't my question. My question was, where are we with the project? Are we on schedule with the project? If I ask you if we're on schedule with the project, the answer is yes or no. Now, beyond that, there's an explanation. And that's where point first communication comes in. What's the point? The point is yes or no, we are on schedule or we're not on schedule. Then your brief explanation of, we assessed that we had 2 tech problems. And so the next steps, I recommend that we take the next 2 weeks to fix the tech problems and make sure our launch is 100% before we go. So, what is the question? Answer the question first. Don't ramp up, don't give history, just answer the question. And then use what you've learned in point first communication to give a brief explanation, the next steps, and then stop talking. So, burying your point is a critical one in demonstrating your capability versus burying your capability along with your point. The second one is that you over explain. Now, this is a lot like burying your point, but what happens is sometimes people do get to the point pretty quickly, but then they keep talking and they give you their point and they explain the point, but then they add a second point. And then they go back to the first point. And then they start adding history. So they just ramble in their over explanation. And that is another thing that makes you look less capable because you're not being clear. And people forgot that you answered the question because they got lost in all of the other stuff that you told them. So it's not what you know, it's about what they need to know. And if they only need to know, are we on schedule? Don't give them the full history and share some points that are not relevant. Because that makes you very unclear. And again, represents your capability. The third one is something that I hear a lot, and that is you sound tentative instead of sounding certain. And this is where people have conversations like, well, I think maybe, or this may be a dumb idea. Well, I'm not an expert, but I don't know if this makes sense. Now, that could be habit, that could be insecurity, it could be politeness because you don't want to look like a know it all. But the bottom line is that all of those things make you look smaller than you are and don't make you look capable. So don't apologize for your idea before you present it. Be confident. I recommend. I see two options. My initial assessment is those are clear starting points. And they help people understand that you are clear in what you think or what you believe. And clarity reinforces capability. Now, the fourth one isn't anything that we have in our group, but sometimes people who are very smart or very accomplished in what they do, they use complex language, either intentionally to demonstrate how smart they are, or unintentionally because they forgot what it was like to not know what they already know. And so they use jargon, they give far more detail than is useful to the speaker. This is particularly significant in AI times because AI will present every single fact that you could ever want and then some. So people don't need more facts. What they need is judgment and discernment. They need someone who prioritizes and explains what's useful. They explain the risks and the opportunities. So those are things that, in human communication that are very important. So AI makes complex information available, but it doesn't make clear thinking available. Complex thinking is good. Complicated communication is not. So you need to make sure the example that I use is, can a 12-year-old understand what you're saying? And people think that if you simplify, somehow it makes you look dumb. And it doesn't. It makes you clear. And people appreciate clarity because when they hear clarity, they can say, I understand what you mean. And if I understand you, I trust you. And if I understand your recommendation, I'm ready to act on your recommendation. So, using complexity to demonstrate expertise is another way that capability gets buried. The other thing is huge, and most of us do this, and that is answer before we have organized our thoughts. And that's where you start talking right away. I ask you a question, and there's this need to answer. So you start talking. Hello, Mohammed. Welcome. If you will grab paper and pencil, at the end of this, we are going to do a self audit. So I need you to be prepared for that. We're going over 7 areas of audit where people who are very capable don't demonstrate that capability to other people because of bad communication habits. And right now we are in habit number 5, which is answering before organizing your thoughts. So people feel the need to answer immediately when if they would just pause for 2 or 3 seconds, their brain will process what what they want to say, as opposed to opening your mouth right away and sort of fumbling through while the brain is trying to catch up. So you want to make sure that you give yourself just a few seconds to get your answer together before you open your mouth. Now, sometimes a few seconds is not enough. And that's where you need to say things like, let me think about that for a moment. And that buys you a few more seconds. Another thing you can say is, well, my initial thought is, and you can answer what your initial thought is until your brain gets calm. And then you can clarify if there are more things. Now, this is another point first communication opportunity, but I'm going to give the point first communication to you in a different way. I'm going to give it to you in the 3 P's. And those 3 P's are point, proof, purpose. So just like point first communication, the first thing you do is you answer with the point. You don't ramp up, you don't give history, you answer their question. Is the project on schedule? The answer is yes or no. It's that simple. That's the point of his question.
Hello?
Yes or no?
Hello?
Yes, Mohammed.
Sorry for interrupting.
No problem.
I have not gotten the third point. The first point you said point,
Point.
second proof,
Uh-huh. The
and the
second
third one
is
purpose.
purpose.
You said
Purpose. Purpose.
purpose. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So the first one is point, and that is simple. Answer the question. It's a yes or no, or whatever the answer is. But don't ramp up to it. Just what is the point of the question? The second is proof, and that is just like point first communication. It is give a brief example or explanation. And that's where you say, is the project on schedule? The point is no. The proof is we found 2 technical problems that will affect the customer experience. So that's the explanation, or in this case, proof. And then the purpose. The purpose is the same as next steps. And the next steps are point, no, it's not on schedule. Proof, we found 2 technical issues that will affect the customer experience. And purpose, I think we should wait 2 weeks to fix the problems and make sure that the launch is 100% ready to go. So that is your point, your proof, and your purpose. And if you take that approach, the point first communication, to organize your thoughts before you answer. The sixth area that you can impact the appearance of your capability and affect your executive presence is to become defensive under pressure. And that can be very difficult. And under pressure can mean you're feeling nervous about a presentation, you feel you're close to a deadline and you're nervous about it. But where it really comes out is where someone challenges you or asks a question when you're feeling pressured. Because what happens in that situation is that your brain or your body reacts before your brain reacts. So your body reacts by getting more tense. Your jaw starts to tighten, your shoulders tighten, your breathing becomes more shallow, and your thoughts become unclear. So when that happens, you are more inclined to say something that you don't really mean, or to appear to get agitated. And if you appear agitated, that greatly affects your executive presence, because executive presence is maintaining emotional stability, that no matter what happens, you remain calm. So instead of getting defensive, you can address this in two ways. The first way is to say something like, well, I see it differently. Let me explain. Or another way is to repeat what they just said to you. If you have explained a position and they've said, I don't agree with you on that one. So your response may be, you don't agree with me? And then you ask a question. Would you like to share your perspective? Ask as many questions as you need to understand where they're coming from and to control your emotions. Asking questions is huge because when you ask questions, that releases the tension in the room. The person who has a different perspective now feels like they're being heard. And when someone feels like they're being heard, they are less inclined to be aggressive. Yes, Dee Dee.
In many of these kind of conversations, you're dealing with people that want to make a good impression on their boss or steal your ideas. There's a lot of competition and a lot of manipulation. And I've seen in a lot of times people try and sabotage someone's idea. They already think it's a good idea, but they're coming in with negativity for a strategic position.
Mhm.
In these situations, it's hard not to be defensive, or at least look defensive when you're trying to get to that point and cut through that. You
Mhm.
know, how would you suggest that be done?
Actually, if you adopt the same perspective, by repeating what they said and then asking questions. If they're really trying to sabotage you, or if they're just trying to put a negative spin on what you say, you're putting them on the spot. You're forcing them to say something that's counter to you. And if they don't really believe it, they get caught in their own lie. And that is, and I don't mean to sound nasty or unprofessional, but they got what was coming to them. They made themselves look foolish.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, you stayed calm and you showed that you were open to hearing their idea. Now, that doesn't change your perspective. At the end, you still say, I have a different perspective. Let me tell you what it is. Let me explain. And then you get the last word. So ultimately, you look like the bigger person. And you still have the opportunity to calmly express your opinion. And even though it may be difficult not to be defensive, by turning the conversation, the spotlight on them for a moment, it allows you to get your emotions under control while they're talking. Because someone who has nefarious intentions
Mhm.
will trip over their own feet.
Mhm.
And there's a certain pleasure in that.
Well, I find that most people who have nefarious intentions tend to talk over the top, interrupt, and dominate the whole conversation, and you can't get a word in edgewise. You can't get a calm, decent word in edgewise, and they usually have a cozy relationship with management, so they feel they can get away with that. And I
Well,
find it very difficult.
it can be very difficult depending on the political environment that you're in. But again, asking questions. And if you can't get a word in edgewise, that's finally where you interrupt and you say, may I please finish my thought? And if you have to say that multiple times, you say that multiple times. I have a different perspective and I would like to explain that now. And you can say that firmly without being defensive.
That's true.
So the objective in that situation is to put them in their place professionally, because ultimately they will look foolish if you remain calm. Because in that situation that you've just described, they're trying to make themselves sound more important than you and and to potentially sabotage you in the process. And to do that, you just need to stay calm because they don't win. If they get your goat and they get you all ired up, then
Mhm.
they're winning, and you do not want them to win. Hello, Nisha, welcome. We are talking about 7 audit points that make people look less capable than they really are. And if you can grab paper and pencil wherever you are, we're going to do an audit in just a few minutes. But right now we're on number 7 because what I'm doing is I'm explaining the points, and then I'm going to go back and ask you how you score yourself on each of those 7 points. So number 7 is where you communicate information, but not value. Anybody can say, our customer satisfaction rating has dropped 18% this month. Anybody can say that. AI can say that. What you need to do is to share value with that. This is where you express your knowledge, your opinions, your judgment, your usefulness. So, this is where you would say, after you explain the fact, which is that our customer satisfaction ratings are down 18% this month, then you would continue by saying, I believe it is because we saw this change happen when our response times slowed. So I believe we need to focus all of our energy on increasing response times, which may require adding another person to the fulfillment department. Now that is value. I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but you never take a problem to management. You take a problem with a recommendation or a solution. You never want to be the one that delivers the problem to your boss. You want to provide the problem and a recommendation. Even if they don't adopt your recommendation, you came in presenting value. And that's what's important, and that's what they pay you for. So, as you go through that, you want to know that your opinion matters. Your expertise matters. And this is an example where you show your capability. So, to summarize what we have, the areas that I'm going to audit you on in a minute are burying your point in history and background and all kinds of information that they don't need. Number two, over explaining, where you get to the point, but you keep talking and you ramble. You sound tentative instead of sounding certain. This is where you start things with, well, I think maybe this might be a dumb idea, but, well, I'm not an expert, but I don't know if this makes sense. That's where you sound tentative instead of sounding certain. You're apologizing for your idea before you present it. Number four is where you use complexity to demonstrate your expertise. That's where you use complex language, detail beyond what the listener knows, and jargon. And that's either intentional to show how smart you are, or unintentional because you know so much about the subject that you've forgotten what it's like to not know. So you talk over your listener's head. What you need to be doing is communicating usefulness, not complexity. Because complex thinking is good, but complex communication is not. Clarity is what's important. Number five is answering before you organize your thoughts. And that's where you just start talking. You get a question and you feel the need to talk right away, where you start talking before your brain has loaded what it wants to say, so it has to catch up. And that's where you want to pause for a few seconds before you answer a question. And that's where you want to use the point first communication to organize your thoughts. And we talked about doing that with point, proof, and purpose, which is the same as point, example or explanation, and next steps. Number six is you become defensive under pressure. And number seven is that you communicate information, not value. Excuse me a second. So if you have paper and pencil, I want you to score yourself 0, 1, or 2. 0 is, I never do this. 1 is, I occasionally do this. And 2 is, I frequently do this. So let's go over these one at a time. And I'm not going to ask you your scores. This is a self audit for you. So, number 1, how often do you bury your point? How often do you tell a story instead of answering the question? 0 is that you do it. 1 is that you occasionally do it. And 2 is that you frequently do it. The second one is you over-explain. You may get to the point right away, but then you keep talking. You throw in another point. Then you go back to your first point and you explain more about it. Rate yourself 0 for you rarely do it, 1 for you occasionally do it, and 2 for you frequently do it. Number 3 is that you sound tentative instead of certain. That's where you preface your opinions and your recommendations with, I don't know if this makes sense, or well, maybe this is a dumb idea, but instead of basically you're apologizing for your idea before you present it. And that's 0 rarely, 1 occasionally, 2 frequently. Number 4 is you use complexity to demonstrate your expertise, or unknowingly use a lot of jargon and complexity when you speak. And that's where you're either intentionally or accidentally showing what you know, not what is useful to the listener. And that's 0 rarely, 1 occasionally, and 2 frequently. Number 5 is talking before you organize your thoughts. And this would be where you start talking without the structure of something like point first communication. So instead of answering with a point, a brief explanation or example, and next steps, you just start answering without thinking about it. So that's 0 rarely, 1 occasionally, and 2 frequently. Number 6, how often do you become defensive under pressure? And that could be because you're nervous with a presentation. It could be that you're close to a deadline and you're nervous about it. You feel under pressure about it, or it could be that someone has challenged you, challenged your opinion because they have a different opinion, or they just want to sabotage you. How often can you keep your cool? So that's 0 rarely, 1 occasionally, or 2 frequently that you become defensive. And number 7 is you communicate information, but you don't communicate value. And that is where you say our customer satisfaction rates are 18 points below normal. You've provided the information, but you haven't given any value. And the value is this began to happen when we slowed our delivery times. So you want to make sure so how often do you communicate information but not value? And that is 1 or 0 rarely, 1 occasionally, and 2 frequently. Now add up your results. You don't have to share them. So you have somewhere between 0 and 14. Now, If you look over your scores, you can see the areas that you need to improve yourself. And chances are every single one of us, including me, have an area where we got a 2 or at least a 1. And that tells us that that's an area that we need to work on. If you have more than one area, know that I'm not asking you to improve all of those areas at one time. Just pick one area that you're going to commit to improve. And then let's talk about how you can do that. Over the next several days, I want you to be aware of that area. And if you find yourself doing it, just make a note to yourself. Yep, darn it, I did it again. And then the next time you do it, stop yourself. And when you stop yourself, try to adopt the next way to do it. So that may mean adopting point first communication. It might mean biting your tongue when you find yourself over explaining. It could be you find yourself saying, well, I don't know if this makes sense, but stop yourself in mid sentence and change that sentence to, my initial assessment is. If you're using complex language or jargon when you're speaking, stop talking. Think about what you're saying for a second and remove some of those complex words. If you find that you're answering before you organize your thoughts, then your lesson there is to pause before you start talking. Just 2 seconds, that's all you need for your brain to catch up. But pause before you start speaking. If you're becoming defensive, that's where you want to ask a question or repeat what they just said. That simple act of repeating what they said, saying, let me make sure I understand. You're saying, and then repeat it, or ask a question. Can you explain to me what risk you're seeing that I'm not seeing? That conversation, that question or statement will give you a chance to calm down. And the last one is communicating information but not value. And if you find that you're just giving statistics, stop for a moment and add your opinion to that. If you don't have an answer, if you don't know why your customer satisfaction numbers are 18% down, then you can say, I just learned that our customer satisfaction rates are 18% down. I'm going to go explore what has changed, why that is. So the value that you're providing there is not giving an answer, but it's giving an action and letting them know that you are going to take ownership of this. And that's the value that you're providing. There is a gap with many people between their capabilities and the perceived capabilities that other people think they have, between your leadership ability and whether other people think that you are leadership material. And often you are very capable and you have that leadership material. You have what it takes. But because of these 7 simple communications habits, you're not demonstrating your capability to other people. And that makes a huge difference. So do yourself a favor, figure out the one area that you can improve the most and focus on that. Don't try to change everything. Pick one area and master it. Does anyone have any questions?
I'm sorry, can y'all hear me? It's kind of windy where I am.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
Okay, so my question is how how long would you say we should focus on, like, if we pick one and we're working on it, at how long do you is there a time frame where you can kind of like reference where you should start to begin to see you're improving so you can move on to the next, or how would you measure that?
Well, it takes as long as it takes. So for some people, the bottom line is awareness is the first step. So when you know that it's a problem and you notice it when you're speaking, that is when you can start working on it. So you don't have to wait till you've mastered it. You just need to start working on it to acknowledge that it's a problem and identify when you're making that mistake and start to fix it. So if you have two areas that you want to work on, you don't have to master the first one. You just have to start identifying it and taking action. And that might take a week. It might take a month before you move on to the second one. It depends on how frequently you're put in that situation for you to work on it. Does that answer your question? Great.
Yes, it does.
Excellent. Any other questions before we wrap up today? Yes, Dee Dee.
For me, giving facts, like you had mentioned, our personnel or our things went down.
Mhm.
Can't remember the word, but
That's okay.
um, and I see things like the facts hold the information. So I would have put it such as, since our communication department has changed, the people have not been happy with our services or whatever. I
Mhm.
would have put the point in there.
Yes,
And is that acceptable, or should I have said the way you did, divide it up, put the information, and then put the conclusion? For me, it is interconnected with the change.
absolutely. The way that you're saying it is perfect because
Okay.
you're incorporating the value of
Uh huh.
of the why
Uh huh.
with the statistic.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
that's perfectly fine.
That's the scientific method. Normally, is
Absolutely.
you add the what changed before the explanation of why it happened. So yeah.
Exactly. And that's
Okay.
fine. The bottom line is that you're giving value. You're not giving an abstract statistic with
Okay.
no support. So that's very
Sounds
good.
good.
Mohammed, do you have any questions before we wrap up?
My question is, in communication, it's good you try to pause in between your communication.
Mhm.
And the question here is, for how long should you be pausing in your communication or between your points? For how long should you pause before you bring out another point?
If I'm understanding, you're asking how long do you work on something before you move to the next one? Is that correct?
Yes, but the issue is the pausing. For how long should you pause in between your communications?
I'm afraid I'm not understanding you clearly. The connection isn't great. Is anyone else understanding the question, Dee Dee?
He asked, how long do you pause? communicating, how long the pause should be.
Thank you, Dee Dee. I appreciate that. I'm sorry, I'm having some connection issues here, Mohammed. The pause is nothing more than 2, 3 seconds at the most. It feels like a long time to you, but not to them. It just gives you long enough to let your brain process. And if that's still not long enough, then you want to say something like, my initial thought is, and that buys you a little bit of time. But a 2-second pause is really all you need for your brain to process, because your brain processes much faster than your spoken word does. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Very good. Well, we are going to wrap up a little early unless you have more questions. For those of you on the replay, thank you for being here today. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you did your own self-assessment so that you are prepared to know what you need to work on. And I'm now going to shut off the recording so I can say an official goodbye to our live friends today. Have a great day, everyone.